Imagine a man walking 25 miles a day, every single day, for 25 years straight. Not a monk on a pilgrimage. Not an explorer chasing glory. A soldier. A Roman soldier. And if he stopped, if his legs gave out, if he begged for rest, he could be beaten to death by his own comrades. How does a civilization turn human beings into walking machines? And why did the most powerful empire in history depend on it? The year is 60 AD. Somewhere in the mountains of what is now Wales, a Roman legion is moving. Not riding. Not resting. Moving. 6,000 men. Fully armed. Carrying everything they own on their backs. The weight alone would crush most people, 60, sometimes 80 pounds of gear strapped to a wooden pole over one shoulder. They've already walked 15 miles today. They'll walk 10 more before they stop. And when they do stop, they won't sleep. Not yet. First, they build a camp. From scratch. Every single night. This wasn't suffering. This wasn't punishment. This was Tuesday. There is a reason Rome conquered 2 million square miles of territory. There is a reason their empire lasted 500 years in the west and nearly 1500 in the east. It wasn't just the swords, the shields, or the tactics. It was the marching. It was the system behind the marching. And when you understand what that system actually looked like, the math, the mechanics, the psychological architecture of it, you won't just admire it. You'll be stunned that human beings were capable of it at all. Let's start with the basics, because the basics are already insane. A Roman legionary was expected to complete a standard march, what they called an iter, of roughly 20 Roman miles per day. A Roman mile, by the way, was mil passuum, 1,000 paces, and it measured about 1,480 meters. So 20 Roman miles is just under 30 kilometers. Nearly 18 modern miles. Every day. On roads, through forests, over mountains, in summer heat and winter frost. But here's where it gets deeper. That 20-mile number wasn't the limit. That was the comfortable march. The easy day. Roman military writers, men like Vegetius and Frontinus, described a second category called the iter magnum, the Great March. That was 24 miles. And then there was the emergency pace. The force march. No name, just pure survival speed. Caesar's legions, during his Gallic campaigns, routinely covered 30, even 40 miles in a single day when the situation demanded it. 40 miles. On foot. In armor. Carrying their entire world on their backs. Julius Caesar once moved his army 800 miles in 8 days to crush a rebellion before it could spread. That's 100 miles a day, but not every soldier, not the whole column. The point is the infrastructure, the physical conditioning, the mental expectation that when Caesar said move, the army didn't ask how far. It just moved. And this wasn't an accident. It was an engineered outcome. Built over centuries. Refined, tested, and passed down like a sacred text. To understand why Roman soldiers couldn't stop marching, you have to understand what they were actually trained to do before they ever saw a battlefield. The moment a young man joined a legion, typically around age 17 or 18, he entered a world that had one central obsession, the march. Before sword drills, before formations, before tactics, marching. Roman military trainers, called ordinarii, started recruits on short distances and progressively extended them, exactly the way a modern coach builds an athlete's endurance. But the Romans had a specific benchmark they trained every soldier toward: 3 route marches per month, each one the full 20-mile standard pace, and one of them at the faster military step. The military step, by the way, wasn't just walking faster. It had a specific cadence, roughly 120 steps per minute at the regular pace, and 140 steps per minute at the military step. The rhythm was enforced. Drums, pipes, cadence callers. The entire column moved as one organism because individual timing created gaps, and gaps got people killed. Now add the gear. The Romans called the full pack sarcina, the burden. It included your armor, usually chainmail or segmented plate, weighing around 15 to 20 pounds. Your shield, the iconic scutum, another 10 to 15 pounds. Your 2 javelins, your short sword, your dagger. Entrenching tools, a pickaxe, a turf cutter, a stake for the camp palisade. Food for 3 days, hardtack, salted meat, possibly a skin of sour wine. Cooking equipment. A length of rope. A leather tent section, because the tent was split among 8 men, each carrying 1 piece. Military historians have reconstructed these loads. The consensus is somewhere between 44 and 66 pounds, depending on campaign conditions. Some accounts push to 90 pounds in the heaviest configurations. The Roman soldiers were known, somewhat proudly, as Muli Morioni, Marius's mules, named after the general Gaius Marius who reformed the army in 107 BC and stripped away the baggage carts that slowed legions down. He put everything on the soldiers' backs instead. They complained. They always complained. And then they marched anyway. The time to build a standard marching camp? Roughly 3 to 4 hours. After a full day's march. Before dinner. Now let's talk about what all of this actually felt like. Because this isn't just a story about logistics. This is a story about human beings. The average Roman legionary was not a giant. Skeletal evidence from Roman-era sites puts the average male legionary at about 5 feet 6 inches, weighing perhaps 140 to 160 pounds. Lean, conditioned, but not superhuman. He was a farmer's son from Italy, or later from Spain, Gaul, North Africa, the Rhine frontier. He signed up for 25 years. 25 years. The same contract. The same march. Every campaign season. Imagine what your feet looked like after a decade. Roman soldiers wore caligae, open-toed sandals with heavily hobnailed soles, specifically designed to grip road surfaces and last through brutal mileage. Military archaeologists have found these soles with dozens of iron hobnails worn nearly flat. Evidence of someone who walked until the metal gave out. And then got new sandals and kept walking. The blisters were constant. Infections from blisters were common. The Medici, Roman military doctors, remarkably sophisticated for their era, recorded treatments for foot ailments with a frequency that tells you everything you need to know. Vinegar soaks. Honey poultices. Animal fat rubbed into cracked skin at night. The shoulders were a different kind of suffering. The furca, the carrying pole, transferred most of the pack weight through a single point on the right shoulder. Soldiers developed characteristic muscle asymmetries. Archaeological studies have found legionary skeletons with noticeably overdeveloped right arm and shoulder bones compared to the left. Their bodies literally reshaped themselves around the march. Sleep was rationed. A marching camp operated on watch rotations, 4 watches through the night, each one staffed by rotating sentries. Even on rest nights, you might get 4 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Over months, the sleep deprivation built. Men learned to sleep in minutes. To sleep sitting up. To sleep while chewing hardtack at a rest stop, knowing they had 2 more hours before camp. Food kept them moving. But only barely. The Roman soldier's primary ration was grain, specifically wheat, carried as whole grain and ground fresh, then baked into hard biscuits or cooked into pools, a thick porridge. Each soldier consumed roughly 3 pounds of grain per day, providing somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 calories. Enough for a sedentary person to feel full. Barely enough for a man marching 20 miles with 60 pounds on his back. The deficit was real. Campaign accounts describe soldiers visibly losing weight over long marches. Caesar noted it. Livy noted it. The historians of the ancient world kept describing the same thing, legions that looked gaunt, hollow-eyed, moving on willpower as much as nutrition, and still maintaining their pace. Still building their camp. Still, if necessary, fighting at the end of it. They supplemented when they could. Foraging teams went out from every marching column, finding fruit, hunting game, raiding local farms when the campaign turned hostile. In friendly territory, supply chains kept up. In enemy territory, you ate what you could carry and nothing else. 3 days of hard rations. Then you found more or you went hungry and marched anyway. Wine, sour, heavily diluted, was a daily ration. Not for pleasure. For sanitation. Water in the ancient world was dangerously unpredictable. The vinegar-wine mixture, called posca, was acidic enough to suppress many waterborne pathogens. When Caesar's army ran out of water in North Africa, soldiers reportedly sucked moisture from cactus and grass. When they found a well, the push to drink was so dangerous, dehydrated men drinking too fast, that officers had to physically control the queue with drawn swords. This is who these men were. This is what daily life looked like. And they volunteered for it. Or close enough to it. Now let's talk about what happened when you didn't march. When you fell behind. When you quit. The Roman military disciplinary system was, by modern standards, extraordinarily brutal. And it was designed to be. Because the Romans understood something that most armies in history have failed to grasp: an army that cannot be disciplined cannot be deployed. And an army that cannot be deployed is just a mob with weapons. The foundational punishment in the Roman legions was fustuarium. If a soldier deserted his post, fell asleep on watch, lost his equipment, or showed cowardice in battle, the centurion could sentence him to fustuarium. The condemned soldier was struck, once, by his centurion with a staff. And then every man in the unit was permitted to beat him. With fists, with sticks, with whatever was at hand. Few survived it. It was not meant to be survived. It was a public execution dressed as a punishment, with the added psychological dimension that the man was killed by his own brothers rather than by the state. But there was something worse. For unit-wide failures, cowardice in the field, mass desertion, breaking formation, the Romans used decimation. Real decimation. The original one. Every 10th man in the unit, selected by lot, was beaten to death by the other 9. It didn't matter if you were a good soldier. It didn't matter if you'd fought bravely for 15 years. If your number came up, your unit killed you. Because the Romans understood collective accountability in a way that sounds monstrous to modern ears but functioned with terrifying effectiveness. After a decimation, no Roman unit ever needed a second one. The memory lasted generations. Even falling behind on the march had consequences. The centurion, the backbone of the Roman military, the officer responsible for 80 men, carried a vitis, a vine staff, not as a symbol but as a tool. He used it. He used it on men who slowed down. On men who complained too loudly. On men who dropped their pack and sat in the road. The vitis became so associated with brutality that several centurions in the historical record were nicknamed for their favorite phrase while swinging it. One particularly infamous centurion, mentioned by the historian Tacitus, was known throughout the Rhine legions by the nickname Cedo Ultram, give me another. Because he broke so many vine staffs on soldiers' backs. Now here is where the Roman system reveals its true genius. Because all of that brutality would have produced broken men, traumatized, resentful, ready to desert the moment the pressure lifted, if it hadn't been paired with something else. A counterweight. A reason to stay. The Roman legion created identity on a level that most modern institutions can only approximate. The basic unit wasn't the legion. It was the contubernium, 8 men. 8 men who shared a tent. Shared a fire. Shared a cooking pot. Marched in the same column position every single day for years. Slept close enough to hear each other breathe. Fought back to back. Carried each other when the wounds were bad enough. Buried each other when they weren't. 8 men who knew every blister, every nightmare, every letter from home. 8 men who had watched each other suffer through the same brutal marches and build the same brutal camps and eat the same terrible grain porridge in the same freezing rain in some mountain valley 3,000 miles from anyone they'd ever loved. That bond, that specific, forged-in misery bond, was the real foundation of Roman military power. Not the swords. Not the tactics. The fact that when the line started to break, a Roman soldier would look left and look right and see the same faces he'd seen every single morning for 5 years. And that was enough. That was always enough. The march built the bond. The camp built the routine. The routine built the identity. And the identity built the army. Now compare this to what Rome was fighting. The Gauls who faced Caesar's legions were individually, often, more physically impressive. Bigger men. Fiercer reputations. Battle-hungry cultures that had been warring for generations. The Germanic tribes that pushed against the Rhine were feared across the ancient world. The Parthians had cavalry so skilled that their tactics, feigning retreat, turning to shoot, gave us the phrase, a Parthian shot, which we still use today as a parting shot. None of them could match the march. The Gauls could mass in enormous numbers. Caesar faced armies of 60,000, 80,000, once reportedly 300,000, but they couldn't sustain a campaign. They couldn't keep that many men fed, organized, and moving in coordination for weeks on end. Their supply chains were informal, their camp discipline non-existent. They would assemble for a decisive battle, and if that battle didn't happen fast enough, the coalition would begin to fracture. Men would go home for harvest. Leaders would argue. The energy would dissipate. Caesar's legions didn't need the decisive battle to happen on the enemy's timeline. They could march to where the enemy was. And if the enemy moved, they could march after them. And if the enemy ran, they could march faster than a retreating disorganized horde. Alexander the Great's Macedonian phalanx was a fearsome battlefield force. But Alexander's campaigns were ultimately limited by how far his infantry could walk in a season and how well his supply lines held. His army fractured at the edges of the known world partly because the men were exhausted. Roman legions were designed for exactly that exhaustion. Built to sustain it. Built to function inside it. The Mongols, 1,000 years later, would develop a mobile warfare system so fast it shocked the medieval world. But Mongol speed was bought with horses, and horses eat, and horses die, and supply chains for an army of horses are vast and fragile. The Romans needed no horses to move. They were the horses. There's one more piece to this system. One final layer that ties everything together. The roads. Rome built 250,000 miles of roads across the empire. Some of those roads are still there. You can walk on them today, the original stones, worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet, still following the same lines that Roman surveyors marked out with a grommer in the 1st century BC. Those roads weren't built for trade. Not primarily. They were built for the legions. Built so that an army could move from Rome to the Rhine in 2 weeks. Built so that a crisis on the eastern border could receive reinforcements from the western legions before the situation became catastrophic. Built so that the march, the relentless, mechanical, unstoppable Roman march, could happen on a hard surface, at maximum speed, in any weather. The roads were the nervous system. The legions were the muscles. The marching was the heartbeat. And as long as the heart kept beating, the empire held. So here is the answer to the question we started with. Why couldn't Roman soldiers stop marching? Because the march was not a means to an end. The march was the system itself. It built physical conditioning that turned ordinary men into something close to endurance athletes. It built camp-building skills that gave every Roman army a fortified position every single night, removing one of the most dangerous vulnerabilities in ancient warfare, the exposed bivouac. It built the contubernian bond that made Roman units fight with a cohesion that larger, fiercer, individually braver armies couldn't match. It built a culture of discipline and collective identity so deep that the punishment for breaking it wasn't just pain. It was exile from the only community that mattered anymore. And it built speed. The one military advantage that trumps nearly every other. The ability to be somewhere before your enemy expects you. To arrive when you are thought to be a week away. To strike before the defense is organized. Speed that didn't come from horses or ships or technology. Speed that came from 60 pounds on a man's back, hobnailed sandals on a stone road, a vine staff ready to descend on anyone who slowed down, and 8 men in a tent who would be disappointed in you if you did. The Roman soldier couldn't stop marching because stopping was not something the Roman army had built into itself. The machine had no off switch. It only had faster and slower. And for 500 years, that was enough to run the world. Here's a question worth sitting with. We have GPS, satellite logistics, mechanized transport, and precision airstrikes. And yet modern armies still make their soldiers march. Still make them carry heavy packs. Still build physical endurance as the foundation of military identity. Is that tradition? Nostalgia? Or did the Romans discover something about human beings that we haven't been able to engineer our way out of? Leave your answer below. Because I genuinely don't know if the A